The state of ethics and corporate social responsibility in 2020. Something very important to our world and something that a lot of people should take notice to. Now, to engage in ethical behavior may be good business, but the decision to run a business ethically may transcend the idea that it is good business or good for business. Now, when we're talking about ethics and social responsibility within the corporate world, there are three things that we need to think about. The first one is the value for society as a whole. The second one is the balance in varying stakeholder interest. And the third one is accountability both financially and non-financially. These are three very important issues that a lot of people think about when doing business with other companies or partnering with other companies, whether it's investing or other business aspects. Now, to talk about ethical responsibility in the world, I'd like to start with an example of a very high-profile unethical case within corporate America. A lot of people know the company Enron and its infamous fall from fame back in the 2000s. Now, there have been many articles written on Enron and the fall of their company, and it has been well documented about how they lied to their investors and how they lied to their own employees for many years to save face of their dying company. In an article written called Ethical Conflicts at Enron, the Moral Responsibility in Corporate Capitalism, this was an article written by Sharon Watkins, who was the infamous Enron whistleblower. She was the employee who brought to light the unethical behavior that Enron had been doing, and more specifically, their accounting fraud. Enron had been hiding from their company for years that they were actually losing money, but to save face and to continue their investors' wealth and interest, they decided to lie about their accounting. Now, Sharon was a former Enron vice president who, like I said, pointed out the accounting irregularities at the top of the company. She actually reported to the company's CEO in an anonymous letter, an anonymous memo, pointing out what was happening that he wasn't able to see. Thinking that that would solve the issue, Sharon decided to go no further. However, no action was taken, and in 2002, the whole accounting fraud and everything that happened was brought to light, which actually led to the fall of Enron. Within 6 weeks, Enron actually filed for bankruptcy because it had been brought to light all of their fraud, and when the real numbers came out, investors pulled their money and they wanted nothing to do with Enron. In 2002, Sharon was named one of the Persons of the Year for her valiant acts in Enron and her responsibility to their investors and everyone else. She was considered a very moral and righteous person. Now, Sharon worked directly under Enron's CFO, Andy Fastow, and she recalls discovering these accounting fraudulent issues and bringing them to him and finding out that he actually did know about these accounting issues, which was something that was very shocking to her, that the upper level corporate people within the company were committing this fraud knowing that they were lying to their investors and they were lying to their employees. Enron committed fraud to hide all of their bankruptcy for years. They fooled shareholders by producing false information, and it eventually led to their demise. There hasn't been an instance where companies had lied to their investors, and they'd lied to their employees, and they'd lied to their citizens, and ended up well after finding out. All of these companies end up falling, and it never turns out well. So the moral of the story is to never do these kind of things, and it never ends up working out. And like I said, 6 weeks after Enron's falsified information were made public, Enron filed for bankruptcy. It was the end. There was no coming back from the lies that they had built up over the years. Now, some things that we had learned from this and some things that we had gained from this. Actually, a lot of good things came from the fall of Enron and the demise of their company. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was created in 2002, clearly takes aim at the rampant abuses that have shaken investors. It represents a broad overhaul of corporate fraud, accounting, and securities laws. Now, criminal fraud has been defined to include engaging in any scheme or artifice to defraud shareholders. The maximum sentence for defrauding pension funds has been raised to 10 years. Chief executives and financial officers of publicly traded companies must also certify their financial statements and will face up to 20 years in jail if they knowingly or willfully allow material misleading information into their financial statements. So that's something really big for investors, that they can invest into companies knowing that they're protected by law and that CEOs and CFOs and other high-ranking officials will be held responsibly if their company is committing fraud. Now, how has this changed our view on ethics? We can't lose sight of thinking that all companies are doing bad things and all companies are committing fraud, but it's also something that we really need to think about. Sharon ends her article by saying this: "We must not lose this opportunity to ensure that the appropriate safeguards are in place so we can all be comfortable against investing on our hard-earned dollars in this country's equity market. It's also time for our business leaders to do the right thing and recognize the moral responsibility of our capitalist system and live up to that." Now, following the Enron demise and looking towards the future of moral responsibility in corporate world, there are a lot of things today that employers are doing today to educate their employees to stay away from fraudulent activity or unethical activity. The Immigration Advisors Authority actually has a website that entails what companies nowadays are doing to help their employees. They're going through extensive ethical training principles training, helping them to understand, what things are ethical and what things aren't ethical within that gray area of understanding. They're also creating much more specific code of conducts. Now, a lot of people have the idea that code of conducts are for punishing people that commit unethical acts. However, the primary value of a professional code of conduct is not a checklist for disciplining non-conforming members, although breaches of a code of conduct usually do carry professional disciplinary consequences. Rather, its primary value is to act as a prompt sheet for the promotion of ethical decision-making by members of that profession. Now, another thing that this website talks about is the public as they build confidence in profession's trustworthiness. Now, if an investor is able to see a company's code of conduct and their values align with the investor's values, then it's easier for an investor to trust what's happening with their money because they know that there's a safeguard on unethical acts that aren't going to be happening. And just like I said, the clients, as they provide a greater transparency and certainty about their affairs that are handled. If a potential investor is coming into a company and talking about potentially giving them their hard-earned money, then they're going to want to know about the type of ethical things that go on within the company and that there are safeguards to make sure that the right thing is being done with their money. Also, for the code of conduct, members of that profession, as they provide supporting framework for resisting pressure to act inappropriately and for making acceptable decisions in what may be, like I mentioned, the gray areas. A lot of people know the difference between pretty black and white unethical things, but a lot of times within business there are some ways to get around the truth and to have little lies that people might not necessarily think are as important but are major unethical breaches. Now, to talk about the current state of ethics, there was an article written by James Weaver and David M. Wazelsky called "Corporate Ethics and Compliance Programs: A Report, Analysis, and Critique." These men were able to compile evidence from many companies of different sizes to understand what types of ethical and responsible training is being done to help their employees. Now, through their research, they found that ethics and compliance in the corporate world was very reactionary to issues within each company, meaning that if they didn't have compliance issues in the past with their employees or with their shareholders, then there wasn't much specific training going on with that company. They also concluded that those employees who did receive training on ethics and compliance received very little and basic training. That did not identify possible unethical behavior, meaning that the training that they received was very bland, was very short, and it really didn't get down to the issues of things that have happened in the past and things that might happen in the future within companies. Now, the two men close with this on their opinion on the state of ethics in 2020. They say the field of business ethics should feel a sense of urgency to devise methods for enhancing the effectiveness of ethics and compliance programs in organizations. New organizational ethics and compliance standards formed in response to regulatory pressures or from self-regulation within an industry must be dynamic enough to encompass a greater understanding of human behavior and address individuals' tendencies in a normatively meaning manner. Now, the conclusion, in my opinion, is that there is going to be a larger government outreach to keep businesses up to ethical standards, and this should help us move forward in the future.